We're let's see here. We're going to be pausing just a minute. We have a caucus meeting that's ending, and so we'll give us about 5 minutes or so. I think everybody will be coming over. Thank you. let's get started. Devin Seaball's here. All right. Well, thank you for coming to our transportation meeting today. I appreciate everybody's attendance. And, but most importantly, I was looking at this fine crowd back through here and seeing everybody. Y'all, we have the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Tillery. Thank you for being here. And I don't know if you know this committee, but the chairman's very involved in the airport world, and it's a great concern about making sure it meets the needs of Georgians. And I appreciate what you've done. Appreciate you being here. Okay, so real quick, we're going to move pretty quick. Thank you for being here. Now, we've had a big, busy summer, and I tell you, I've been to a lot of y'all's communities and lots of meetings, and I just, I really appreciate the people that are out here in the stands, is what I call them, for just the attention they've given many of you and myself, and making sure they understand the issues across our state, inviting us to meetings and meeting with us. And I just want to tell you folks out there that I appreciate it. I appreciate you a lot. So we're going to start off with something very unique. Lauren and I get to share Forsyth County. And Scott Evans, Scott, stand up over, come to the podium, and bring your sidekick with you. And Scott is from Forsyth County. And if you look on the media boards, you'll see, Forward Forsyth. Scott works with the Forsyth Chamber. Now, I've known Mr. Evans for your entire life. Really, known his parents, and he was in the chamber, worked in the private industry, but works very clearly with really a community that works on technology every day in Forsyth County. And Scott's got something he wants to share with us. I think you're going to enjoy it. I think you're going to go. The first time I learned about it, it was wow. And because this is really a cure or help for transportation issues throughout our state. So we'll hold our questions to the end. Scott, would you introduce with you? Let me turn your mic on.
I hear you. Thank you, Chairman Jaspers. This is my friend Eric Hornsby. He is the CEO of SmartPoint IO. SmartPoint is a company in Forsyth County that I guess 6 years ago when I started the chamber, I met Eric, and we have this dream, if you will, and that's what I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But I brought him with me because I can talk about technology pretty much into the weeds, but there's a few places that I don't want to go, or I can't go, and if I can't, he can. So he's my right-hand man. But thanks for having us.
I'm going to let you let one of our members around you there.
Oh,
there you go.
We need to let her. She is my personal representative. Again, my name is Scott Evans. I am with Forward Forsyth, which is the economic development entity for Forsyth County. A lot of you may know where Forsyth County is, but if you're from maybe South Georgia and you don't, we're about 45 minutes north up 400. A lot of people don't know this, but Alpharetta, 1/3 of Alpharetta is in the Forsyth County. And being up 400, Alpharetta, the city of Alpharetta has done a great job of recruiting fintech companies. And so a lot of people know it as Transaction Alley. Well, in 2022, we got designated part of 400 as the technology corridor. And the reason is we have the highest concentration of technology workers in the state of Georgia. Now, when I'm going out and talking to CEOs and recruiting companies, when I talk to them, I show them this graphic. We actually have the same concentration as we have around Georgia Tech. But Georgia Tech has about 4 square miles of that concentration. Buckhead has 12 square miles of that concentration. But between Cumming, Georgia, Johns Creek, and Milton, we have the same concentration. We just have like 75 square miles of it. And so back in 2000 and 18, Forsyth County recruited me. I spent a career rescuing companies out of bankruptcy, and I used technology a lot to fix those companies. And one of the things that we did in Forsyth County is we realized that, growing our economic development efforts, we wanted to chase technology companies. So again, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to the committee, because I want to talk to you about a project that I have been talking to Rick about it, and Eric and I have been discussing this for many, many years. But having come from the private world, I like to do economic development a little bit differently. Nothing wrong with going and knocking on doors and trying to find companies, but what I would really like to have is an identifying factor. So when, just like I'm about to speak about Curiosity Lab, and I even mentioned Alpharetta, they're known around the world as fintech capital. Well, in Forsyth County, we need some sort of identity as well. We've got a lot of the great factors. We've got a great hospital. We've got the roads. We've got, it's one of the fastest growing communities in the state. But from an economic development perspective, we need something that identifies us and recruits companies to us. And quite honestly, in economic development, a lot of times we give away property taxes in efforts to recruit a company to us. But if we have these kind of assets, then we don't have to do that. Anyway, so my project that I have been proposing to folks is we want to create an asset. And ultimately, we believe this project, when we do this, will be a prototype where Georgia Department of Transportation, working with private industry, can prototype safety and mobility solutions. From a local standpoint, I want to see it happen because it will become an economic development, a regional economic development draw. And not just for Forsyth County, but this would actually stretch across Forsyth, Gwinnett, and Fulton. But what we want to do is create a lab, if you will, across a corridor that we have, 141 that stretches between us and Forsyth County and Johns Creek. Actually, it goes through Johns Creek and all the way down to Jimmy Carter Boulevard. But what we want to be is, as Georgia becomes the center of mobility and auto manufacturing, we would like to own the technology space where companies would come here and, working in mobility, would create the technology that goes into the future application of transportation modes. In 2019, actually I think it was 2018, this was the first year I started with the chamber, I attended a meeting at the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and the meeting that day was transportation, and Russell McMurray was one of the panelists, and I asked the question, not knowing where it would lead 6 years later to standing here, but I asked him, I said, Commissioner McMurray, most people think of transportation as asphalt and concrete. How do you use technology in your work plans? And so he says, well, I'll give you the short answer is, if you can put technology on existing infrastructure, we generally see about a 40% increased yield. But he said, if you want a deeper answer, he says, stick around and I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. And being a technology person, if the commissioner asks you to stick around, you do. And so, true to his word, he came over and we started a conversation, which evolved into about 6 months of conversations going back and forth to his office. And what this blew into is I told him, I said, Commissioner, I said, you've probably got 20 things that you'd like to do. But somewhere down the line, you don't have the resources to all of them, but somewhere there's a use case, and nothing in technology happens until you have a use case. It's like, give me a use case because I want to go up and start an incubator in Forsyth County and would love to work with you on it. And my agenda is very clear. I just want the ability to say, I'm starting an incubator with GDOT. I'm not asking for any money. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just asking for the use case. I'll go and raise money. We'll do a hackathon, and I'll pit seniors from Georgia Tech against seniors from University of North Georgia and seniors from University of Georgia. And I said, well, host this hackathon, and if we can solve it, great. You get something out of it. If you don't, we just had a good time. And if they win, somebody gets beer money. So we hosted this hackathon, and it blew into something that I never thought it would. But at the time, Jeff Duncan was lieutenant governor. He found out about it. He gave us some money. I never asked for money. He gave us some money. And this blew into an international software competition. And before it was over with, we had recruited a company as far away from Amsterdam to participate in this event. Now, with all that happened in COVID, and I don't want to make, by any means make light of that. I lost family members from that. But one of the things was we ended our, what we call Chalking Traffic Lights software event in November of 2019, and 4 months later, the world was in quarantine. So we never got to do phase 2. We never got to capitalize on that. The real value in hosting that software competition, and it was 3 days over a weekend, is we put GDOT engineers on the judging panel. And if you know much about government procurement, it's a safer route to go to use Ernst & Young and use some of the big companies, because I think the statistic is like 98%, not 98, it's like 68% of software projects fail because of, increased scope and things like that. So software is inherently risky. But so that kind of weeds out small companies for participating in government procurement processes. And so by doing this hackathon event, we were able to put GDOT engineers on our judging panel, and they got to see technology that they weren't exposed to in the world, because a lot of that comes from the bigger companies. And when I was doing software, creating software, I was a business analyst, and I knew if I could ever get the engineers with the technologists don't know what the problems the engineers have. The engineers don't know what the technologists can do, but I used the idea of a hackathon to be the business analyst to communicate that. And so it was a great event. We just never got to do phase 2. Well, in 2021, Commissioner McMurray is always our keynote speaker at our transportation summit. And so he and I saw each other at the end of the event. He says, hey, Scott, I'm sorry we never got to do that. I'm like, hey, the world changed. He said, but would you like to do something again? And I said, absolutely. I said, here's what I'm thinking. And he says, I like it. You got my blessing. You know who to talk to. You know the engineers down there. Just go and do something and keep me up to date. So here's my idea. And I want to, eventually there's going to be a need for some funds. I apologize. There's going to be a need for funds, and that'll come out whenever it needs to. Today, I just want to talk to you about what the idea is. So here's the what. What are we proposing? We want to create an advanced transportation technology corridor where technology is created and tested for future applications in a real-world environment. And the sole purpose is for 2 things: to make mobility safer and more efficient. So, the where. In Forsyth County, we've got a road, State Highway 141, that stretches from Forsyth County, South Forsyth. It's State Highway 141, Peachtree Parkway, but it's 27 miles, and it goes all the way down to Jimmy Carter Boulevard. And it passes through the South Forsyth, the city of Johns Creek, and the city of Peachtree Corners. And if you know much about the city of Peachtree Corners, and they are partners with us, because Eric actually does a lot of work with them there. If you know much about Peachtree Corners, and they have an Ollie Tram, which is an autonomous vehicle that moves people around their city. And the purpose of that is to direct people to and from their retail and their convention center. But that's a unique asset. And the way it's unique is because they have an incubator attached to that autonomous track, and companies from all around the world are coming there because it's one of the few places that they can actually build their software and test it in a real life environment. Well, we want to work with the city of Johns Creek and the city of Peachtree Corners and basically expand what they're doing with Curiosity Labs up and down that whole 27 miles. So here is a graphic that I created last night. It just shows you from South Forsyth down to Gwinnett, and it does go through 3 jurisdictions. I haven't talked about this a lot. I talked to the economic developers who are my counterparts in those areas, and there's an agreement we'd all like to do this. Well, why do we want to do it? I mentioned that earlier. We want to make mobility safer and more efficient. But to do that, we're about to move into something called Web 3.0. And those are new technologies, blockchain, AI, IoT. Those technologies are about to create things that we've never even thought of yet. We're about to start solving for problems that we are just beginning to realize that we have. And we want to basically create this corridor where companies, as I mentioned, would come here and test on it. So in 2019, when I did the Talking Traffic Lights event with GDOT, they gave me a data set on a project that they were doing around North Avenue. And I used that data set and I basically took it out to the development community, and I said to the technologists, I said, if you had this data, what could you build on top of it? And so we had $100,000, $75,000 of that went to the winning idea to further develop the idea for with GDOT. And that was really the big ticket. They didn't really care about the money because you can't do a whole lot with $75,000 in creating technology. But what they really wanted to do, it was the winner of the event was a professor and his grad student from the University of Iowa had created an AI that recognized flaws in traffic designs before an accident ever happened. And so they won the event. They used that money to do some analysis with GDOT. And again, the world changed and we never got to capitalize on what we did there. But it was groundbreaking in the fact that that professor and his young lady teaching assistant never would have had a chance in a government procurement process. They wouldn't have even known about it because they wouldn't have been looking. But now Georgia GDOT was able to take advantage of their technology. So in the Talking Traffic Lights event, one of the things that I learned about was vehicle platooning. The data that was given to me was from a pilot program that GDOT was testing around North Avenue, where the traffic lights actually, and that's why we called it Talking Traffic Lights, the traffic lights actually talked to the car. So as you're approaching an intersection, it tells you if you speed up, you can make it on a green light, or you may need to slow down a little bit. But what it does is it stacks cars to move through the intersection more efficiently. Platooning the vehicles is actually, there's a lot that goes along with it. It increased load capacity on highways, there's safety benefits, and there's also fuel savings. But imagine, if you will, an emergency vehicle that has that same capacity to talk to the traffic lights. I know Lauren is a former EMT, maybe still does it on the side, but in an EMT or a fireman, as you're moving through an intersection, the most dangerous point of contact before they get to the fire is making a left-hand turn in a busy intersection. Well, with the technology that was being prototyped back then, is firemen could actually flip a switch as the fire truck gets close to the intersection that clears the intersection in the direction that they're traveling and making it a safe left turn, or basically clearing the intersection. Artificial intelligence today has the potential to recognize in milliseconds a crash. And think about it, if a GDOT camera right now had artificial intelligence powering it, and it recognized a crash, sends an alert to the EMS, pinpoints where the accident is, and can guesstimate how many people may be injured, and send people to that crash before the cars come to a stop. And in a world of EMS, seconds saves lives. But better yet, if the artificial intelligence in that camera can warn the two vehicles that they're on a collision course and take corrective action before the accident happens, or at least mitigate the damage. So last week, I hosted an event with commercial realtors, and I brought Stacy Watson up from the Georgia Ports Authority, and he started talking about the inland ports, and I grabbed one of his slides here, and it's probably no news to you guys, but Savannah is the third largest port, or the busiest container port in the United States. And really, if you see where all this is going and the companies that are moving here and they want to be here with the Georgia ports, and you've got all the automotive that's happening. You've got BMW in Greenville. You've got Nissan in Tennessee, Mercedes in Alabama, and then you've got all the announcements that's happening in Georgia. We're the center of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers for that industry. Well, the best way to move parts in and out of the ports more rapidly is through dedicated lanes using autonomous freight vehicles. And this technology is not new. I mean, Disney's been using it for a long time. That's how they manage their parades. Their parades are always on time and equally spaced apart. The SkyTrain in Atlanta Airport. This can't happen until the technology is actually baked into the infrastructure. And so that's what we're trying to propose to GDOT, is that we turn Highway 141 into a highway that has the technology on it. And we don't want to put all the technology on it. We just want to put the base foundations to where companies can come using different technologies and build on top of it. Again, my agenda is very clear. I want to recruit those companies to Forsyth County because, as you saw in my slides, we have the highest concentration of tech workers in the state of Georgia. Here's a few graphics of platooning that's being successfully deployed in other countries. And an article that came out yesterday in Automotive World about how it's successful in China, and Europe's beginning to use that technology as well. So the technology that we're talking about is something called edge computing. And if you'll bear with me just a couple minutes, as my dad would say, I'm about to put 5 pounds of something into a 1 pound bag, but I'm going to keep it at a very high level. I'll stick around and you can ask me questions later if you like. But edge computing, in the 1980s, compute power was a big box down somewhere in the building, and all you had was these green screens and a keyboard on your desktop. Well, by the end of the late 80s and the early 90s, that compute power got smaller, fit on your desktop. It was within arm's reach. Then came the internet, and the internet allowed the compute power to be sent through the internet to a data center somewhere in the world, processed, come back across the internet, and give you the results there on your desktop. Well, now, edge compute devices is that data center, but it's hanging on the pole, powering the camera and talking to the cars and the trucks. That's a quick graphic. Basically, that little red dot would be, and they're really about the size of a screen, but Eric's company actually makes these edge compute devices. But I'm sure maybe you've heard of CV2X. Well, if you have CV2X as the base technology, running through this micro data center. Now you've got bicycles, you've got cars, you've got pedestrians, and you've got trucks that has the devices that communicates and can alert one another of their surroundings. For example, and I like to bike, but this bicycle rider is invisible to most of the cars in that intersection. And he's very vulnerable as long as he stays behind that truck. And Representative Byrd, I do this in downtown Woodstock. I ride my bike, and I'll pull up next to a van because I'd rather be hit by the side of that van than head on by a car that didn't see me. And so when I go through downtown Woodstock, I'm usually hiding behind a box truck like that. But that bicycle rider is very vulnerable the moment he pulls up to that and that light changes. Now, let's say, because this technology does exist. There's technology out there, but it's not widely dispersed. It's not talking to each other. But that guy can have something in his ear that alerts him to those other cars. But if those cars don't have it, he's still invisible to them. Well, if they don't see you, if you don't see them, they don't see you, and that's what makes this a very dangerous situation. Now, even if all things were working the way they're supposed to, if they're using traditional cloud computing, this information of talking together and it goes to a cloud data center somewhere else and it gets processed back, and by the time it gets to the people that needs to know the information, there's an accident. So by moving, and that's where the term edge compute comes from, is moving the power of a data center onto a pole. It allows technologies that are out in the public domain right now. It's just not being utilized. And now, if you know, and I got another slide in just a second, but it allows these aggregate together. And based upon this platform, we can build technologies that goes into the future vehicles. Here's a little graphic that shows in an edge compute environment, you know, the data center is actually on the pole and it's communicating to the cars and the traffic, the bicycles and the pedestrians, letting them know. And spatial awareness, you'll hear this term a lot, spatial awareness. That's what we're trying to solve for. Is we don't want to get in people's business. We just want them to know that there's a bicycle ahead, or there's a child crossing a schoolyard. A school crossing. But let me give you one more case study here. So you've got a box truck followed by 3 vehicles. It's a rainy morning, and they barely see each other, but yet they're following, and they're doing what they should do. They're not going fast. But if the camera on that truck tells the driver that there's a kid crossing up ahead, and that truck has the smart devices on it, that not only does it alert him of the kids crossing the road, but it also applies brake assist. That truck avoids hitting that kid. But the problem is those 3 cars behind it don't see it until it's too late and they've had an accordion crash. Now, with edge compute devices at the edge of the highway, that truck can share its camera with all 4 of those vehicles. And when that camera on that first truck is displayed on all 3 cars and it recognizes that there's a kid crossing the road, brake assist works on all 4 cars. All 4 drivers knows that there's an alert ahead, and we avoid an accident altogether. And here's just a couple more use cases. This industry term for this is intelligent traffic systems. And I'll summarize with this. In working with GDOT engineers, we spec'd out Highway 141, a state highway, because it facilitates a variety of residential, commercial, and coexisting uses together. It's a melting pot. Much of the technology already exists that we need to make our world safer. The problem is that we're still early in that process. They don't talk together, as I've already mentioned. But that's changing with what you guys did recently with going to CV to X as the platform. That's the communication that would run into the edge compute devices and allows these devices to talk together. But GDOT engineers told me this. They said creating better spatial awareness for road users is the key to making mobility safer and more efficient. If we can solve this for the state of Georgia, we can solve it for every Department of Transportation. And what I want to do is build this corridor in our community and lead the world in creating the next wave of safety and efficiency transportation technology. So I'm here to answer questions if you like.
Yeah, I give Scott the hurry up lasso. So the passion of people that work in this technology is just never ending, isn't it? And when he was telling me about it, I thought this would be a good little thing for y'all to listen to and just think about the future and not really just what's here today. And what I'll do is I'll provide you, because we got to move on. There's a lot of other things going on today too. We're going to hold the questions. If it's all right, I'll get them your contact,
Yes,
Scott.
Absolutely.
And so they can get back with you, because I've had questions like, okay, data, how do they pay for this? I've had all these different things that people are asking this in this room right now. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you, and thank y'all for coming down and talking to us today.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Catherine, you're hiding behind the post over there. You can come to the middle if you'd like, to the mic, to the table. Catherine is with the Department of Agriculture. We worked with them very carefully last year on the electric vehicle bill. We're the state of the art, I was talking to a group yesterday that, I've had opportunity to speak after helping write that bill with Catherine's help and many others all over the United States. People want to know how we're doing this and how could you pass such a bill? And it took the cooperation of a lot of people, including Catherine and the Department of Ag and all of you and many others. But I asked her to look at where we at today. I think if you heard my floor speech on the bill, it was very clear that this isn't over, y'all. We're just touching the subject matter. And wanted Catherine to spend a few minutes what we need to be looking at and what challenges they're seeing with the Department of Agriculture. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Catherine Russell. I'm the policy director at the Department of Agriculture, and I actually wanted to take a moment. We've got some things going on at the department, and we've expanded a little bit, and I have someone helping me now, Patrick Guthrie, who I think some of you guys may be familiar with, and he's now on our policy team. So look for either of us if you want to continue to ask questions and to move forward. But yeah, we've got a lot going on at the department. I kind of wanted to just give you guys an idea of what we've been looking at. So in preparation for SB 146, moving forward, we're expected to start doing our inspections in January of 2025, so we've been preparing for a couple of things. The first thing that I should probably tell you about is we've started looking at rules. We've asked for some feedback from the industry so that we can start drafting those. We haven't gotten any yet, but we're going to go ahead and try to get started on that. We're also looking at developing some internal structures or internal strategies. One of the things that we worry about when we start talking about different scenarios is how do we control faulty chargers, right? What if we go out to an inspection site and there's a danger? Well, no other state is doing this, and so there's not anything to base our ideas upon. And in fact, we've been getting a lot of calls. We got a call from California 2 weeks ago about this. But we're looking at potentially some like fire-resistant bags, canvas bags that we could put over a unit so that we could secure it down. Someone asked me this question a couple weeks ago, and I was like, well, I don't know, garbage bags and duct tape until we figure it out. But that's not the approach that we would like to take, and so we're gonna work through that just a little bit more. But something that's a little bit more challenging, and I know that we have discussed this previously, and it hasn't moved forward much, is the equipment that we will need to actually conduct the testing. There's a company that has developed a charger testing unit. They were quoting us that it would cost about $50,000 per machine. That was in March. They are now saying that it's going to cost $150,000, and it's not that the components are more expensive; it's that there is now a demand. So once we start looking at an increase on that level, plus adding other equipment that we'll need to perform the tests, in particular the load banks that we would connect to the machines, so that once we pull the power off, we run it through the testing machine. It has to go somewhere. So we've been talking with this company. They said we can put these load banks, which essentially are like big space heaters, on the back of a truck, and that it'll just emit heat, and that's how we'll get rid of the power. My concern is that I don't know what that's going to do to a truck, right? Or if it starts raining. We don't actually, this has never been tested anywhere. We don't know how safe it's going to be for our inspectors or if it'll even work. And so we have some real concerns about what that looks like moving forward. We probably couldn't even move the truck until the load banks cooled off for a while. I just thought about that. So there's some kind of logistical challenges that we're trying to go ahead and address, but wanted you guys to be aware that right now the quote that we're getting for equipment is about $250,000 per inspector, which is not a small number. I've actually reached out to Georgia Tech to tell them about this kind of situation that we're in, to see if they have anyone maybe in some of their emerging technology student groups or think tanks, the incubators. And they are interested in looking at the project. And so that may be something that moves forward, but that's just kind of where we are right now. I'm trying to do my due diligence to reach out everywhere to make sure that there isn't waste and that we don't jump the gun and buy the wrong stuff, but continue to move forward. We've had a couple of conversations with people that have concerns about the law as it's written. Some of them you guys might want to know about. We have heard that there are folks who have fleets that are concerned about what kind of charging equipment they have and what will be required, the testing that will be required to go ahead and certify those. And level 2 chargers may be difficult to do, right, because there's not a display. We've been given clear instructions from the legislature about what we were supposed to do, and so in an instance like that, we would have to say that these weren't certified, they would fail. And I think that there's some kind of unintended consequences that could be revisited there. Some of my initial thoughts, and these are not department objectives, these are just Catherine's initial thoughts. I was thinking about putting in maybe like a subcharger and then having it operate similarly to how gasoline fleets work, gas-powered fleet purchasing works, and we could go ahead and have the taxes remitted on the front end without us having to come in and inspect where the power is actually being transferred to the vehicle. But those are some things that you might want to go ahead and have on your radar to consider. It could be moving forward. But I think I just wanted to kind of hit the high points there. Didn't want to drag it out too long, but are there any questions that anyone has for me?
We're 18. Is that Mr. Holler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Catherine, for coming. I was curious. I think you probably even saw a lot of our eyes kind of jump, from that raise from 50,000 to about 150,000.
Us too.
I was actually kind of curious because we're, looking at advanced technology and making that available. In a time where we're seeing this shift that's going more towards electrical vehicles and sustainability ideas, has there been considerable just out of curiosity, maybe tax rebates from the federal government to acquiring, or at least to be able to have these stations available?
The charging stations?
The charging stations, yeah.
Well, I think that there's been some federal legislation. I think the NEVI plan is probably one that we've heard of the most. But are you asking if so
Just
there's
to-
that funding that you're
Right,
aware of for
it's
the
funding there
charging
to just kind of
stations?
offset the cost.
Are you asking if there's funding available to support the department?
No, specifically for
So
the,
sorry.
I mean, that's okay, I need to be clearer, specifically for the installation of these stations. I know, similarly, I've seen it, where there may be like a federal rebate for solar panels or, something to that regard.
Certainly. I think I would probably have to revisit some of the federal language and scan through it before I could give you a certain answer. I was not prepared for that
Okay, no,
today.
And I think we need to let, if Josh wants to, when he's up here speaking in a moment, can talk about the
he's a
NEVI
great-
plan and charging. He can probably give you a
Oh,
little
yeah,
highlight, give you a
sorry to
little
jump the
highlight
gun
of
there.
it.
All right, appreciate it.
Oh, there is one
But-
more.
Sure,
one
go
more
ahead,
thing
ma'am.
I might add. We also learned that with the installation of some of these chargers in the more rural areas, we're beginning to anticipate that some of these chargers may go down if there's inadequate Wi-Fi accessibility. It's not something that had occurred to me, but it is proving to be a problem in some more rural areas. And so we want to equip our inspectors with devices to try to measure, if that input is the problem. Because otherwise we'll potentially be failing these chargers in rural areas over and over again, and we'd like to be able to keep up with that kind of data so that we have a protocol moving forward so that we aren't continually taking chargers off of the market.
Mr. Floor Leader.
Thank you. Two questions. First is, the trucks that are going out to do the inspections, why could you not, once the test is being done, it feed into the truck and put, fill the electricity into the truck that's going around doing the inspection? Or if there's somebody sitting there, that they could plug into them and give them some free electricity while the test is being done. Those are something to think about. And two, as far as paying for all this, I like my diesel 2500 truck. I just don't want to be one subsidizing electric vehicles. I think either the industry or those that are using it should be paying for the testing and the charging, because I'm going to still be using diesel.
So, great questions and thoughts. We actually considered having electric vehicles for our inspectors to drive around. The problem with that is that if you use up all of the charge in your vehicle to reach the next charging station to test, and it doesn't work, you're stuck out there, potentially in a very rural area. Also, the charge that is required to get an accurate read is pretty much a full battery. So between charges, you would have to expend all of the energy. And we would ideally like for our inspectors to get from one site to the next as quickly as possible, rather than making laps or whatever is needed to create availability on that charge or on that vehicle. Your second question about pulling the power off, I think we've gone back and forth and are trying to come up with a good suggestion, although it will be up to the legislature on how to account for making sure that no one is profiting from pulling the power off. I don't believe that we could give it to a passerby. I think that would be a violation of the gratuities clause. I think we'd have to be probably pretty careful with that. Okay, I'm sorry. No, let's go back to the third one.
About paying for paying for these testing and the charges.
That's a policy question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Floor Leader. I believe that you'll get to weigh in on that someday, I believe. Chairman Perkle.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to ask the second part of my question offline. But I wanted to say thank you for being responsive to the taxpayer. 50 to 150, unless it's a green tractor, it doesn't make much sense. And so it's hard to understand. So I talked to my dad yesterday, who's still on the farm. My dad is 78. He couldn't get his tractor to crank that I have been working on, and he couldn't get a tractor to crank. He took the battery in, and they put this load on it to check and see what the discharge of the battery was. We've had this type of technology for a while, although the batteries now are a little bit more. Thank you for reaching out to our good friends just down the road at the technical school about maybe coming up with a plan for accurate data that can measure to make sure the consumer's getting what they need. Because it's not, the EV stuff is new, but I got to tell you, we've been working with batteries. It was a 1969 tractor that he was working on. So we've been dealing with batteries and discharge for a while, and the way you charge them up. And thank you for reaching out, looking after the consumer, and not just stroking a check, because those things are important.
Thank you.
And I'll also add, Chairman Perkle, since Catherine and I talked a couple days ago about this, we also reached out to the University of Georgia and Kennesaw on our end. Brad Thomas, who's one of our members, is a professional engineer and has engaged 2 of his engineers at his company to look at maybe a different way of using Ohm's law like you're talking about to check. So this is, as Catherine and I talked, this is a moving target, and we're all in on solving it. Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kathleen. And this might be a policy question, but you touched on the subject of taxes. So part of your responsibility, I understand, as Department of Agriculture, when you're checking our gas pumps, you're checking to make sure they're accurate.
Yes.
All right, and will that be part of the mission under the EV as well, as making sure there's an accurate collection of taxes? Did I hear you say that?
It's an accurate reading, and then we will not be involved in collecting those taxes.
Oh, I understand. I'm
We'll
sorry.
just-
Just making sure that it's capturing how much tax is owed
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
EV charging
It's
station.
the same process that we're currently doing with gas.
Have y'all figured out that piece, exactly how that will work as far as how to measure it and then report it to whomever needs to know that information? Is it a
Wait,
calculation?
I'll jump in there, Mr. Williamson. That's the revenues side. It's going to be based on the sales of a kilowatt.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is the science of grabbing that information and giving it to the people that collect the tax.
It's just like they collected at your house.
But the Department of Agriculture will be able to measure that amount.
Well, what they're measuring, Bruce, is the ability for that charger to put out 80 watts. And that's what they're going to be doing. They're make sure that it's safe, that it's putting out the appropriate amount and accuracy in what they're doing. But the taxing side will be.
No, I understand. I get that part. I'm just trying to get my mind around how that data is collected on site. And it's just the ability to be able to charge a battery and then theoretically how much electricity goes through it. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. Right. Well, and like I said, this is a moving target, and but like we committed when we started down this road, did we not, Catherine, to try to work together for other states, and we have other states talking to us all the time about. And I know you'd have had innumerable phone calls, but for public comment, Neil Herring wanted to say a few words. Neil, you'll come on up here, and
Do you want me to stay?
you can stay there. See if there's any other questions. You want to go to the podium, Neil?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it all right if I proceed in front of you?
Sure, please, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Neil Herring. I'm a lobbyist for the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. My colleague, Mr. Woodall, and I just returned from a meeting of the National Sierra Club state lobbyists and talked, this issue was before us. And the two states that are farther ahead of Georgia apparently are Kentucky and Oklahoma in arranging for charging vehicles and taxing that charging. And Oklahoma has voted to not measure, tax, or any, don't even fool with what they call level 2 chargers, which are those that are operated for Goodwill, grocery stores, convenience stores, bars, also churches in Kentucky. I don't know how many churches have got chargers in Georgia, but in Kentucky apparently is covered up with churches with chargers. And basically the idea of taxing something that people are giving away for business or social charitable reasons is being compared to putting a tax on Christmas presents. This is not a tax-happy legislature. I've been here for many years, and I've never seen any enthusiasm for any tax. And the technical difficulties that this stuff presents, and the cost is pretty astonishing. I believe if y'all were to think about exempting the level 2 chargers from any kind of regulation or taxation, you would recover the money needed for the DOT through the highest registration fee for electric vehicles in the country, currently $215 a year. And the number of test equipment devices would be reduced dramatically because there are quite a number of chargers already in service in Georgia where people are giving it away for their own reasons. And so I just wanted y'all to consider those facts.
Here. We're really all curious where y'all had your meeting at.
We had our meeting in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay.
Woodall and I rode the train, but
that
you have to
was my
drive to
next
Carbondale,
question.
Illinois to catch the train. So we used automobiles as well.
That's that's where I was going.
Yeah, we understand, and we're enthusiastic about electric vehicles. It's just that the taxation, we got to pay for transportation. We understand that. We've got to pay for adding and capacity to the transportation system, improving it in numbers of ways. And I honestly believe that value-based pricing on pay-per-mile basis is going to be superior to continuing in the gas tax model because it solves a whole lot of equity issues, distribution of funds issues. Congressional balancing would go away. You would be charging for each mile that person drove, that particular mile. An Atlanta mile is a lot more expensive mile than a mile in your neighborhood. And in my cousin Corbett's neighborhood, them miles, I mean, they ought to be paying people to use them.
Well, have you also have you signed up for the MBUF, the mileage-based user fee research project that GDOT's
We're
undergoing?
very supportive of it, but Georgia has limited enrollment in that. We have people that want to sign up that can't. The door's shut, apparently. But we would welcome an expansion of it.
Right there's Josh. You talked to Josh.
Well, we're trying to
get you
work
in
with
on
Josh
it.
as much as Josh knows we're with him on this stuff all the way.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Dan.
time.
You bet. Anyone else have any questions for Ms. Kathleen? Thank you for being with us, ma'am. I had 18. Who's jumped in there? Mr. Holly?
It actually just sounds like that. It sounds like the first speaker, Scott, that his technology corridor would be a great way to actually test a lot of what we've been hearing up here. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Wise answer.
Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you
We
all.
appreciate you. Next up, we're changing gears. I asked Josh, I know that they have been working on an issue that has been, since we did the study committee for airports and a couple of years ago, is the availability of hangars. And how many people are on waiting lists, blah, 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 and all that good stuff. I think all of y'all know all that. But I asked Josh, and GDOT started a survey in the last little bit, but I'll stop there. Josh, you just fill us in what y'all have been doing with that.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to talk just for a second. So the main point here is sort of stay tuned. We had talked about two things. One was the airport hangar survey, which I've got a little bit of an update on that, and we're still out in the field collecting data from airports within the state. So that survey, there's sort of a two-part component to it. One is looking outside the state of Georgia at other airports. How are they tackling the issues of hangar capacity? What is their, how much more do they need to do? What are they charging? Getting sort of a baseline outside the state of Georgia. And then internally, we have been surveying all the airports in Georgia, and we're still, we just kind of had the initial deadline to get the feedback from airports this last week, and we still have a number, around about 30, that we're still looking to hear from. But collecting data on what do they identify as their capacities? What do their waiting lists look like? And where, if you compare the waiting list between airports, you get some sense of like duplication, right? Someone may have their names on multiple wait lists. So that kind of gives you a sense of what is the demand out there, what is the projected build out, what is the projected cost, what are the projected leasing rates, so that as this committee, that's one of the areas that's been discussed, has been hangar capacity and the role the General Assembly and budgeting should play in that, or what are some mechanisms whereby you could incent the development of hangars. That survey should hopefully give you at least a little bit of a baseline about what's the demand, what's the cost benefit. So we are still in the process of getting those last airports responses so that we can make sure we have as fulsome a response as possible, with the hope of having that available for y'all in committee in January of next year. So that is kind of where we are. Those are the components. I know you're going to hear today, I think, from the Airport Association and other folks, but that's something to be aware of that's out there in the field.
Thank you, Josh. I know y'all been working on this a little bit of while, or is it just some of the airports not responding to you, or what's the slow?
So so the deadline. They actually as I came to understand, the deadline was last week for the airports to respond, and we do have about I think 30 airports that we just haven't heard from yet. So our folks are working through the process of circling back up with them to make sure we have everyone's, because key things we want to do, we want to make sure, especially when it comes to demand and names on lists, we want to eliminate duplication so you have some sense, okay, how many people out there are looking for hangar space? What is that, as close to an accurate number as possible? And that's why it's important for us to get full response as possible from the airports.
Okay.
So that's what we're waiting on, to kind of close that up, combine that together, and then we'll have a PowerPoint presentation for the committee.
Okay. Caucus Chairman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Jasper, as you well know, I'm new to your committee, and I'm intrigued about this subject. I look forward to seeing that report, maybe getting offline and asking some more detailed questions. But most of the hangar space in Georgia, is it owned by the respective airports or the municipalities that control those airports?
Yes.
And then they own the land, build the facilities, or enter into some kind of lease agreement with somebody that put the hangar there and then lease it back? Or
there's probably a diversity of scenarios, and I think we've got folks here from the Airport Association. I would defer that back to them, because as a state, they are not state assets.
Right.
So we have a role as kind of providing at the federal level. We pass through federal funds to these airports that are usually operated by creatures of local government in some capacity.
And you're a step ahead of me, because that's kind of where I was getting to. So what is if in fact, and you just answered that. So it's basically funneling federal dollars down to the local government level.
As well as state. So as part of the budgeting process, you'll also not only appropriate state funds to match provide the state match for the federal funds. There's a state and local match for those federal dollars put down. But additionally, y'all set aside from time to time additional state funds to be able to fund. There are certain project types, like routine maintenance activities, maintenance types projects, that are not federally eligible. And so being able to have a state aid program to airports, that also is administered through GDOT down to the local airports.
Well, thank you for that good information.
Thank you. No other questions for him on that subject matter. The also handed out that Miss Abby handed out to you we're not going to discuss it right now. I want you to take it with you and read it. Is the as you'll see it, is feasibility of the LMIG question that came up last year, and the desire of some people to move it up to 15%, and what that would mean to just general road construction, et cetera, that's out there. So you take that, look over it. We'll come back to that in January, but I think it's a pretty detailed report. Yes, sir, Josh, you go ahead if you'd like to.
Two more quick things in response to your question about federal funds in the NEVI program. So there's two tranches of that federal funding. One is the direct appropriations that come to the states, and that money is specifically earmarked that before the states have discretion about how to invest that in chargers, is we have to have chargers placed every 50 miles along the state's designated EV corridors. So for the state of Georgia, that's our interstate system, plus a couple of key east-west and north-south state routes, 441 and state route and US 441 and US 82. So that's before you could use that beyond that purpose, you have to satisfy that. There is a second tranche, which is a competitive grant program out of that same federal NEVI that's open to all entities, state, local, other agencies that on a rolling basis each year, they make available for purposes of getting a grant fund. So I just want to make one more point as I was sitting here too, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, please.
Thing about the first presentation, the second, seeing that picture up there, and as you raise these good questions, we talk about widening roads, we talk about maintaining roads, but that operational improvement and technology, it's a big part of it as we look to the future. And it dawned on me is the reason we're having these kind of conversations. The first one, the second one is because of the leadership of this committee and this General Assembly. Because you all have adopted legislation when it comes to autonomous and connected vehicles. It's premier in the nation before other states did that came out of this committee, including truck platooning, including the electric vehicle legislation. We are a leader nationally. So because of that, all the questions that come up and the things trying to figure out and reconcile, where sometimes there's not an easy answer yet, and you got a lot of partnership that goes into play, but credit for us even being able to have those conversations belong this committee, Senate committee, and this General Assembly, because you've made the law such that we can be a proving ground for innovative technology. So I didn't want that wasn't occurred to me. I didn't want that to be lost on y'all as well, the role that y'all played in that.
Well, y'all been
Thank you,
very
Mr.
cooperative with Mr. Evans from Forsyth County, and I probably should have prefaced his discussion a little bit more in that where my interest is, and I think our interest would be in AI, that technology is, as Georgia is growing very quickly, and I look at the Savannah area for some of y'all who are in that area, it'll be years before we can actually create asphalt and pavement for some of those issues. But this technology they're looking at will help us get through some of that as things grow. And, that's what I think it just has a thing. And I appreciate you guys very, you guys are working with it very carefully and thoughtfully, and I appreciate it. And also, Commissioner, they're off at a different meeting right now. And so we'd love to have him here, but we know he'll be back in January, and we'll get to talk to him too.
Absolutely.
All righty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. So let's swap to airports. And what I did, I asked Vernon Lee, just as I just picked one of the different associations to kind of start us off just talking about hangar funding, what they're thinking, and looking around it. So if you go to one of their meetings of either association, hangars are where it's at. And I'm glad GDOT is doing the study. That will help us. But if I can get Vernon to go on up to the podium, and you got about 20 minutes, Vernon, to you all to get through this, and tell us what you guys are thinking, what you're seeing out there in the real world.
Well, I'm going to surprise all of you and be really brief today. And I have two of our airport managers here, president of our General Aviation Airports Association. There's 95 airports, general aviation airports in this state. Most of you have one in your district. Some of you may have multiple general aviation airports. A lot of people pass through Georgia with the commercial airports, but not to relate them to an ant pile, but you see an ant pile, but if you kick off the top of an ant pile, you see all the movement. And that's what general aviation is to the economy in this state. So this body, as Josh said, in 20 years we've gone to $3 million funding in aviation to a record-setting $42 million 2 years ago. And that's just for general funding at all. And some of those monies can't be used for hangars to getting to what you're here for today. So I have Hope Macalusa, which she's the airport president this year, but she's also the manager of Peachtree City Falcon Field. And there's a lot of commercial jets, not commercial, but corporate jets down there. I won't name the companies, you'll know a lot of them. And also Mitch Ellerby, our past president, which also is the manager of Upson County Airport, which they have heavily industrial, commercial, corporate use down there. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, that's how many airports we have in the state, but I'll let them speak to the funding of the hangars and how they get funding now and how the need can be met, because sometimes it's a revenue generating subject matter, so therefore it kind of gets lost in the mix. So I'll let them clarify that if you don't mind.
Okay. Mitch, drag that chair over there. If you want to, go ahead and pull that over there with you.
Just to recap what Vernon said, I'm with the Georgia General Aviation Association. There are 2 associations in the state. Ours just happens to only represent general aviation airports, and we have different eligibility to funding in the state, so that's kind of why we are a little bit different. I'd like to start out by thanking Chairman Jaspers and Vice Chair Hagan for having us, as well as all the committee members. There are some folks that I do recognize in the room. Chairman Smith from way back, and I know you certainly have a lot of experience in this area. But I appreciate you guys considering this issue at all, because it is very near and dear to the hearts of general aviation airports in the state. To speak to some of the GDOT study, why we haven't all gotten back on that, is that a lot of the small airports in the state don't have a dedicated airport manager. A lot of them will have someone within the county or the city assigned to that position among several other roles. So I haven't seen the list of who hasn't answered that survey, but I'm guessing a lot on the list are those smaller airports that don't have the dedicated personnel. And we will be happy to help with that study to get that moving along, because we're very curious to see where that all lands as well. And to answer one of the questions that came up earlier about who owns these hangars, most of them are privately owned. They're publicly owned by the city or the county. I think my airport's probably one of the very few exceptions that most of our buildings are actually ground leases. They're built by private equity or a person, and then we lease them the land for the hangar, no different than a Corps of Engineer lake. If it's operated by Corps of Engineer and you have a long-term lease for the land on the border of that lake, it's the same type scenario, although we're limited to how long we can lease that property. So, but most of the smaller airports, the city or the county do own those buildings and are also therefore responsible for maintaining those buildings, insuring those buildings, the whole 9 yards. There are some things that are driving the demand for hangars right now that that aren't a direct result of what we at the airports are doing. We're just kind of handling the fallout. One of those things is that the airlines no longer require a 4-year degree to be hired as an airline captain or move on to be an airline captain. Therefore, flight training has increased significantly. Most of the traffic at my airport is flight training. So we feed the Deltas of the world. We keep them out of Hartsfield and into the smaller airports, and so we have the brunt of that traffic and those aircraft that need to be housed. A second thing is just the business growth in our state. So Georgia means business, and businesses own aircraft. So we now have to house the aircraft that the state is recruiting and bringing here to build up the economy in the state. And just for example, Fayette County, where my airport is, we have Trilith Studios. We have a new data center, one of the largest, and I think it will be the largest in the world, being built in Fayette County. Well, that drives traffic to my airfield. They don't use Hartsfield. They use Falcon Field. So that's where the corporate jets go. So we're just reacting to what was brought to us. Airplanes are expensive. They do prefer to be housed indoors. Even the smaller ones go for hundreds of thousands of dollars these days. And we're not talking about recreational aircraft. A lot of business owners have smaller aircraft. So this isn't just somebody flying around for the fun of it. These are Georgia businesses that we're trying to accommodate here. And the way the funding flow is for the smaller airports in the state is, yes, there are FAA funds available. There's a priority list, but there's $150,000 a year that we are entitled to with the FAA funding, but that expires. So you have 3 years to expend those funds. Once it's handed over to, since our funds flow through GDOT here in this state, it gives us a little extra time, but those funds do expire. And what generally happens is we roll those funds over, so that $150 a year, and stack it up to offset the cost of a larger project. We don't just go out and handpick which projects to do with that, because first of all, they have to be eligible for that federal funding, and second of all, $150,000 does not go very far in today's dollars for sure. And that funding has not increased in over 20 years. So that $150,000 a year was the same $150,000 a year over 20 years ago with no increase. There has been the bill funding, which was a 5-year plan that did supplement a little bit. Most of the airports in our state got 110, I believe, was the extra funds for most of the smaller airports, 110 a year. So add that 110 to the 150. Again, these funds also expire. And so all that's really done is help us handle the cost increase for the projects. So we're not getting any more done. We're just able to supplement the shortage in funds. There is a priority system. So first of all, to be in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, you have to have a minimum of 10 based aircraft. A lot of the smaller airports in the state struggle with that, especially if they don't have hangar space, to keep 10 based aircraft there for them to receive any funding at all. So that struggle is there in our state as well. And then the FAA funding has a priority rating, how they rate the projects that we request funding for. And that ranking for the airport is based on the number of aircraft you have based there or your activity at the airport. So that's one of the factors in the rating system. The second factor is the type of project that it is, whether it's safety and security, statutory, reconstruction or rehabilitation, the environment, planning, or number 6 is capacity, and that's where hangars go. So it's pretty far down the list of priority for funding for you to be able to receive any more than $150 a year. And demand is great in the state of Georgia, as I stated, and it's not like we're placing ads. It's because the economy in the state has grown and the demand for pilots in the commercial level has also grown. So accommodating those aircraft adds to the overall economic health of our state. So we need to be able to accommodate the aircraft we are drawing to our state. And obviously the pricing has gone up. Mitch can speak a little bit more to that because he has hangar projects at his airport. My airport hasn't built a hangar in over 20 years. So he knows a little bit more about the pricing issues than I do.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you, members, for having us up here this morning. And Chairman Jaspers, thank you and everybody in the legislature who was involved with the committee to study airport infrastructure. It's been needed for a long time, and we appreciate your response and the information that was gathered. I want to get into the idea that most cities or counties own the hangars, and let me explain that a little bit. They may own the hangar and receive that revenue, but that revenue is used to run their airport. So it's not like the city or the county is taking this money and putting it somewhere else. The idea of hangar funding being a revenue-producing project always throws up red flags. And those red flags, I believe, come all the way back to the FAA's picture in generations past, where perhaps they felt like somebody was taking FAA money and they're using it to fund something other than aviation, or they're using it to support some individual or some private company. Now, Steve, Brian, and I have had this conversation many times when we're talking about hangar projects and we're talking about hangar funding. It's the same grant assurances are there to make sure I do my job and I do it right for a hangar-funded project as there are for the other 38 grant assurances that I have to sign every time I sign a grant agreement. So we're not, it's nothing that's going to be any different from any of the other grant assurances as far as how we comply with the rules and how we take care of business with it. But that idea of it being revenue producing, it really hit home to me about 18 months ago. There was a discretionary funding from the FAA in Washington available, and I remember the cover letter specifically was for the development of rural airports in order to help them become more self-sustaining. I applied with a project that I had just completed to be reimbursed on hangar funding, and oh no, that's a revenue producing project. We can't do that. Well, hangar rent and fuel sales are the only two ways I can fund my airport. So how is that not helping me to become more self-sustaining? But because it says revenue producing, everybody's hands off. So we need to look beyond that or figure out a way to hold us accountable so that we can do that and can fund the hangars and make sure they're used the correct way. To go to specifics on hangar development, I'm currently got a project to build one bay of T hangars with 2 box hangars on the end of it. 12 years ago, in 2011, I did that same project, and I built 2 bays. I had 26 T hangars, 4 corporate hangars. It cost me $1.2 million to build it. I was able to use the existing FAA funding through entitlement to pay off the debt on that loan. Now, the only way we're able to in Thomaston to do that is because our entire airport is only 30 years old. So I'm not facing the infrastructure problems that a lot of your older, smaller airports have got in the state. Every time they get $150,000, they're having to repair something. So they're never in a position to where they can take that money and set it aside to build hangars. Now, $1.2 million in 2011. Today, I'm trying to build less than half of that same type project, T hangars, box hangars on the end. It's $1.7 million for less than half. I can't do that with the existing interest rates. I cannot make that work. So that's why all of your airports all across the state are asking you to help us with funding hangars. We, the general aviation airports, are dependent upon the state for revenue to help us succeed, to help us provide the needs of our corporate customers. And we appreciate all you can do for us, and I have to end with a great quote that came from right here in the Capitol, referring to Hope's talking about corporate aircraft. CEOs don't arrive on a Greyhound bus.
And I just had one other comment. As Chairman Jaspers mentioned, there was a joint study committee on airport infrastructure and improvements in 2021, and I was privileged to be able to sit on that committee as well. And this is certainly one of the things that is a recommendation that came straight out of that committee. So we appreciate GDOT doing the study, and I look forward to see what their results are.
Okay, if you got a couple of questions here. 24, is that Mr. Bruce?
So just a quick question. Thanks again. This is fascinating to me. I very much appreciate getting educated on this subject. But you mentioned that the only source of you've got very limited sources of funding for your projects. I know there's ad valorem taxes paid on aircraft. Does that all go to the county, general fund, or where does that?
To my knowledge, yes, ad valorem tax is still funded back to the county.
And there's no revenue sharing back from the county, given the fact that these corporate, 'cause in particular, corporate aircraft can go anywhere they want to.
Right, but in my county, we use it as a leverage to, we remind the county commissioners on a regular basis when we have a new project, hey, we're getting all this, you're getting all this revenue on ad valorem. But no, sir, currently there is no funnel back to the airport or ad valorem taxes. There is an FAA mandate on all sales taxes. All sales taxes, whether it be through the 1% that remains on jet fuel or the 4% local that remains on avgas or pilot supplies, all of that comes back to the
So
airport.
fuel taxes sold on site go back there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that ad valorem taxes can be set at the local level.
I'm not familiar with that. Are you?
And
yeah,
your
generally
county,
speaking.
if you've got a huge, a big presence of very expensive corporate aircraft, you probably have a lower rate than some of the.
I can tell you in Fayette County, the Peachtree City Airport Authority is the sponsor. They own and operate the airport. No cities do, nor does the county itself. We receive $0 from either the city or the county locally. So we are self-sustaining. We charge rates that we're able to support ourselves. Not every airport is able to do that. I do know that the ad valorem, in my understanding, in our county, and most of that goes to the school system. We don't receive a dime of it back. And as far as the fuel sales, there's a formula. Only part of that comes back to the airport itself, not all of it.
Well, I can take some of these questions offline, but just real quickly, you talk about measurement of the activity at the airport. Is that just takeoffs and landings?
It
or-
is. An operation is defined as either a takeoff or a landing. So activity is the amount of operations at your airport, and that's a combination of both takeoffs and landings.
Thank you.
And luckily, in today's world, we have better ways to measure that. In the past, we didn't. You physically had to count them, but that's not the case anymore for most airports. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think too, Representative Williamson, you'll find in every, how many did you say there were 90? 95?
Depending.
There are 95 different ways that the ad valorem tax is treated in the county. Some just say, yep, we're going to write it back to you, and some don't. I mean, and it's everything in between. And some of them using it as bargaining for mowing. I mean, that's what we found out.
I can see it could be
Just a
wild
little
west.
bit of everything. Yes, local governments are. Let's see, it's 23. Who's Mr. Smith? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Ms. Hope and Mitch, for what y'all do. A lot of knowledge sitting right out there in those two chairs, and appreciate what y'all do. When you do build hangars, and I know each one of you probably have a different amount of hangars, what kind of funding does the county work with you on trying to fund a project as hangar expansion? Do they help you in any way like that?
They have in the past. We currently are owned and operated by an airport authority. When we began the project at Thomaston 30 years ago, it was nothing for me to go to the local government and ask for $300,000 or $400,000 to operate next year, and part of that was for hangars. However, now we're to the point where we're owned by the airport authority and they administer everything. We don't get specific funding from the city or the county, with the exception of SPLOST funds, which are used as a local match on all of our projects.
Can I follow up with one more?
Oh,
Mr.
please,
Chairman?
yes, sir.
Yes. I think I'm just, from what little bit I know about the Harris County Airport, and they help fund the hangars, but then the money, the revenue that comes in helps pay down the debt that they use on those hangars, which right now we're fortunate we have 5,000-foot runway and 20 hangars, but we have a waiting list of people that want more hangars, which is good for us, but we just don't have the money to build more hangars right now, you know. So.
Yeah, like you mentioned, paying down the debt with the rates the way they are right now, and it's a commercial loan. It's not it's a higher rate loan. And then you've got the maintenance of your other buildings along the way, so you've got to not only have enough income from that building to pay your note, but to maintain it over time as well.
That's right.
And not everyone has support from their city or county.
Just curiosity, how many hangars do each one of y'all have?
I have over 60, including the T hangars. We only own 3 buildings. The rest of them are ground leases built with private funding.
I've got 96 T hangars, 4 small box hangars, and 7 corporate hangars that are all either 100 by 100 or larger.
Very good.
And if you count the individual T hangars, yeah, that number does go up.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just one building, so I just,
That's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Great questions. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. This has been a really informative few months. Thank the chairman for putting this together. It's just, I'm a aviation sort of nerd, so I enjoy being around the airport and things of that nature. So, one thing that I think some of our other representatives hit on is the fact that it seems to be a mixed bag, and some airports are capable of sort of partnering with the county to come up with a plan to build the hangars that are necessary. Is that accurate? Would you think is that an accurate statement?
Yes, sir. It has been in the past that through either a low-interest loan or help from the county, you can fund a project and then get reimbursed through the entitlement program. However, with the price increases on materials and inflation on the whatever type loans you're looking at, I just mentioned a $1.7 million loan that we have on the books for 2024. We will not be doing that if it's all committed to using nothing but entitlement funding, because that $150,000 may be there this year, and then next year I have to put it on a crack seal project, or it may be here the following year, and the next year I have to put it on a paving project, because your safety and your runway airside is what we call it. Your runway taxiway system safety and maintenance comes first. I'm not guaranteed to get that $150,000 over the next 12 years, which is what I'd need just to pay off the principal. So we're not going to do it unless we get some help.
Sure.
We're stagnant.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, talking about the priority list of funding, maintenance, safety all comes way ahead of building new buildings. So for the majority of us, we're barely keeping our head above water, just maintaining our existing infrastructure. And so getting supplemental funds over and above just keeping everything going is almost impossible.
Very good. Thank you for the answers. So let me ask you this question. You mentioned that you have some private hangars. How do they build their hangars? You got a 99-year lease, I suppose, of some sort.
Well, actually, 50 years is the maximum that the FAA will allow. It depends on the amount of the investment. So the way we work it at our airport, and most airports that do this, is that we lease them X amount of space. They come in, they do all the improvements, they tie into the nearest utilities, they do the site work and build the building. Unless you're developing in a whole new area that is, say it's wooded today, then that's a 2-year process because the environmental study has to go in and all of that. So if you walk up to a wooded piece of land, say I've got 23 acres, it's wooded right now, it'd be 2 years before I could touch that land. Just if someone came in and said, I want to build this entire area out, which happens, you're 2 years out from the minute they knock on your door to even beginning moving dirt.
And you're 2 years out too, if you were to just find the funding too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I heard, and I think that the committee heard when we were doing this study was, is it true that the hangar rent won't sustain the construction, or the rents won't sustain the building itself?
I'll let you speak to that.
Our existing hangar rents will sustain the buildings that were built. However, with the latest rate increases, and it's not just interest rates, it's incredible how much my material costs have gone up.
And insurance.
And insurance and all of that. So that's where it won't sustain it, is with the current cost. is where it would.
I do know that a part of the GDOT study, that rates and charges is part of that study. So what happens is you've got airport A, and then you've got B, C, and D around this airport. If one airport doesn't charge what they should be charging, it affects all of us. So my airport, I charge what I should be charging, but they all complain because airports B, C, and D don't charge what I charge.
Sure, that was my next question. Is it a a true market where if all of us have airplanes out there and you've got a limited amount of hangars, is it a time to look at maybe going up from $125 for a T hanger to $300 for a T hanger? And do you think that there's enough room in the market to do that, or would they rather just let their $1 million Cirrus sit on the jetway?
There's room in the market to do that to a certain extent, but the capacity issues are still there regardless. So I could charge $2,000 a month. That wouldn't be right, because that is more than covering everything that needs to be covered, because I can. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Because the problem is the capacity is not there. So even if I charge triple what I should be charging, there's nowhere else for them to go. So you've got X amount of aircraft sitting out on the ramp that want to be in a hangar that would be willing to pay that price, but you're still going to have a percentage of aircraft that cannot be housed because there's just not enough space.
And thank you. And those that are sitting out, how many of those have come to you and said, "Hey, we want some of that 23 acres. We want to build our own"?
I've had a number of companies, not only individuals, but companies that are ready to build out every bit of acreage that I have right now. However, controlling capacity is part of that, because in my case, my airport needs an air traffic control tower. That's a $15 million project that we have to fund locally. So until that tower is built, I need to contain my capacity, because if I add buildings and I add airplanes, the airspace is still an issue, because we don't have a tower to control that. So safety becomes an issue with the added capacity. So you have to look at all of those things together.
Sure. So are you saying, do you need more hangars at your airport?
Absolutely, I do. As many hangars as I could build, I could fill today.
And you've got folks that are willing to build them for you?
I do.
And the hesitation is just the tower?
Yes, because capacity is an issue. Yeah,
All right.
because my airspace is saturated. So building those hangars, while it will accommodate these lists, then you've got the secondary issue of airspace capacity. So all of these things do have to be looked at together and not in a vacuum.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. Thank both of y'all for what you do.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. McCollum, you're 22. One.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a quick question. To build on his, and you had spoke of you can't generate revenue. Was that something that you said federally, or maybe I misheard? But I guess I was looking at it from a business standpoint. So if you build the hangars, do y'all get, say for instance somebody else builds the hangars, do y'all get a percentage of that money that they generate?
Typically, the way that it's handled is through a ground lease.
Okay.
And Hope's much more familiar than I am. In Thomaston, we have not had to cross that bridge yet to where we ground lease. And the reason we haven't, the reason we like to own the hangars, is if I come to you and I want to ground lease a hangar to you at your airport, I want to make enough profit off of the other people who are renting there so that I can keep my airplane in there for free. So I, as an airport manager, a representative of the taxpayer, would say, why should I give that to you when I can charge all four of you hangar rent instead of you collecting from the other three and getting yours free? That being said, I'm not telling people you can't have a ground lease, because there again, we go back to those FAA grant assurances. I'm just telling you that we haven't had to cross that bridge yet, so hope you can answer better.
Yeah, I have a number of ground leases, and the issue that we have there is that if if a third party comes in and builds a hangar on airport property, the FAA does limit the amount of time that they can lease that property. Otherwise, they look at it as you've essentially given that property away. So it's a reversion clause that has to be incorporated in that lease, and certainly no more than 50 years, but it depends on the investment that they've put into the building as to how long you can go. Generally speaking, if someone builds a commercial or a corporate type hangar on my airport today, I give them 30 years. And at the end of the 30 years, we renegotiate. But what we do is we charge per square foot, and that's generally how it's done, is a price per square foot.
Okay.
Is how we charge.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman?
Please, yeah.
So I guess my question is do you have obstacles with the federal or the state that would make you not self-sustaining to generate enough revenue to make a profit, or just at least keep above board? Or is there something you could, anything we could do, or I'm just curious of how all that works as far as funding, as far as generating revenue from the hangars and all that, or the fuel, or...
Well, generally speaking, we should all be charging enough to be self-sustaining. However, with the amount of infrastructure that we have to maintain, that we're federally required to maintain, it becomes a problem to not only provide the fuel, provide the space for the aircraft, but also maintain the airfield itself. So that priority system that I mentioned, if you're just having to continue handling safety projects, you never get to the other things. And I can tell you that's where we are and where we have been for many, many years with the funding that comes from both the federal and state level, and I appreciate that it has been increased over time. It's still very difficult to keep up with our basic maintenance. And so, that's one of the obstacles we deal with.
Great. Just a quick comment to the committee. I think what Chairman Knight, who has been extremely involved in airport issues in the last few years, especially on the education side, and I will absolutely agree on, is the professionalism of these folks. It's amazing. When we be around them, like it's 2 years, 3 years, we've been together quite a bit, knowing what they're doing and making a difference in their community. I appreciate y'all for that. Okay, so we had just some comments, I know Chairman Perkle, he is our Transportation Appropriations Chairman, and I wanted to call on him for a moment to also make some comments about hangars.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have been all over the state, and we've looked at, we've flown into airports all over the state, some very small, some pretty good sized. And we've got some of the best managed airports, as Chairman Knight and I were talking, here. Those that are not here are those 86 others that are very small and still have, that their voice is not here right now. Hangars, if you ask every single airport manager, or those that don't have a manager, they just have an authority. They got a part-time, they got a lawyer that is a part-time pilot, like Whitmer Chet wants to be, that is the chair of the airport authority. That do we need more hangar space? Every single airport in the state of Georgia will say yes. So we don't have the numbers yet, but there's a lot of need. And if I have $1 million airplane, and I don't, I'm gonna put it in the shade somewhere. And I'm gonna go around till I find a spot I can park it under the shade somewhere in this great state. January 1 is coming up. January 1 is important because that's where ad valorem, where it's based on January 1, that's who gets the money on the ad valorem tax. It's a lot of money. What we're doing now is we're speaking on behalf of some of these smaller airports that really don't have a voice. Will T hangars help them? You better believe it will. Will it help economic development? You better believe it will. But some of them are just trying to keep the lights on. So one of the things that I have talked to some in the industry, I've talked to some of the leadership, and Chairman Jaspers perhaps we can come up with a revolving fund. I had a $50 million figure in mind. But come up with a fund that can provide not grants, but a low-interest loan from the state of Georgia. You know, we should cover our cost, but if it would be a low-interest loan on terms that would be advantageous to our airports, those that, you know, some of them it would benefit those that don't even have an airport manager, that has someone like Whit Burchett that is quite capable, but that's not their full-time job. And will that lead to a bigger airport? Will that lead to more economic development? It absolutely will, because airports are vital to the state. When we look at transportation funding, it's planes, trains, ships, and automobiles. And so one of those things, airplanes, airports, absolutely critical to the ongoing bright light of economic freedom in the great state of Georgia. And hangar space is one of those things. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea, and that's why I certainly wanted you to talk about it. Vice Chairman Hagan had a question. Excuse me. I skipped over, actually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with what Chairman Perkle just mentioned, our smaller airports are not represented here. So I would assume that hangar survey would give us some vital information for them there. So I don't know who here, if it's Vernon or Josh or you two, could advise us on how we can help get that information. So we know that rural Georgia was underrepresented in the last census because people did not take it. So we certainly don't want these smaller rural airports to not be represented by not taking the survey. So can you just tell us how we can help with that?
Well, that is why the Association of Georgia General Aviation Airports exists, so that they are represented, and that is why we are here. And if it means Mitch and I driving to every one of those airports, or cities or counties, and yeah, I think he went to 41 in like a day or something. 3 days. That's what we're here for, and that's what we will do. So whatever GDOT needs there for us to assist on to gather that information, we're here for that, and that's who we do represent.
Well, please let us know if any of these airports that have not responded are any of our districts, because I know I would be happy to help.
We're hoping to get a list very soon. So
that'd be great.
This is the first we knew of it as well. Was today. So.
Well, yeah, that there were airports that had not responded.
I will tell you this, though. When we started this association, when I started driving around airports, the first one that I went to when I thought about hangars was McRae, Georgia. McRae has 13 based aircraft. And their volunteer airport manager asked me about hangars. The reason he wanted hangars was not just for the revenue, but so he could maintain his aircraft count for the National Plan of Airspace minimum, which was 10. He's losing airplanes to other airports because he doesn't have hangar space. Local people in McRae are basing their aircraft somewhere else because he doesn't have the hangar space for it. So it is a huge issue for us to represent those small airports. That's what we're here for. We just happen to be at two of the.
Well, I manage Falcon Field, but I live in Meriwether County, so that's Roosevelt Field and Warm Springs, and they're barely keeping at that 10 aircraft, and I help them as much as I can. They call me all the time with questions, and they're in my county, so absolutely, that's who Mitch and I try to help.
That's good. Whit Burchett, did you have anything you want to add on the hangar funding that we talked about?
I just believe that the chairman is right on this issue, and we need to continue to figure out ways to help our small airports and our large airports. I can tell you one of my airports was a stop in Coffee County, and our local community is well invested in our airport, and they see it as an economic driver for our community. And I believe that to be the case for every airport in my district, and certainly every airport in rural Georgia and I don't think we can count. Well, we probably can for up here in Metro. So I'm supportive of the endeavor to find solutions to help our airports and make sure that we've got places to park our airplanes. I'm just telling you, as someone that actively pursues looking at buying an airplane, I'm not putting that thing out on the ramp in the middle of a hailstorm. If I've got to build a hangar at my house, I will. So I feel the stress from some of these business owners that are traveling with these small aircraft, and certainly with the airports. And we just appreciate the dialogue. And thanks. One thing that you guys got to do is continue to tell us how you do your business, because there's not very many of us up here that operate an airport, me included. So you guys tell us, and we'll try to figure out ways to help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, I've got one comment, then I'll ask Chairman Knight to say a few words. But one thing that I saw in funding of hangars was, as Mitch talked about, is using local SPLOST funds, but it takes a close relationship with the county to do that. And that's how my county's done it. It's incredible what they've done, but they convinced the community to include them in SPLOST, and it's just shocking the difference in that airport in 3 years, what that influx of cash has done. So I think that's one of those options that are out there. I know Chairman Knight and I have been, he has been very involved in airports and the education side, and I really appreciate his passion. Those of us that know Chairman Knight.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for allowing me to sit in on this meeting. Very important issue, and I want to thank you and everyone. I agree with you. We have an issue here. Several thoughts just listening. One, I want to make sure you understand these folks do represent all of the general aviation airports. These two people, while they probably sit at some of the most sophisticated and probably the best example of what general aviation airports should be and are, it is general aviation. We want all of our general aviation airports to have an opportunity to have the expertise and to grow and to be what these two airports are. They are major economic drivers in each of not only their counties but the areas. Okay, so I want to make sure that those comments are clear. These are the guys that are representing general aviation airport, our rural airports. While they are the best of the best, they understand what our general aviation airports need, and they are the folks that I go to personally when I have any question about the detail. And just an overall comment. All the communities are different, and whether they have the resources to put in from the local government, or in some cases our local, other rural maybe areas and counties and local governments, they're struggling as it is. They may want to put in the resources to the local airports, but they may not have the means or their other pressing issues. So again, they're trying. And so that's why you may see it in some, and others you may not see the support. Not because they don't want to, but because they may not have all of the resources that other more prosperous counties may have. And second of all, these funding of these hangars is sort of like children. I mean, they're all children, but they're all different. Okay, and it goes back to that relationship, how it's structured, the authority, who owns it, do you have permanent managers? It is so different, and it's so individual based on those individual airports that I hope we started asking questions. It's just an observation. We kept going back to Hope and Mitch's examples, but not all of them are like that. Okay, everybody's is like our children; they're all different, but we love them all. So it is a complicated issue, and I just want to thank the committee for the study. Chairman, thank you. Very important. General aviation is the ecosystem to the entire aviation world. We always focus on commercial. We need to focus on general aviation because it's the underlying ecosystem where if it wasn't for them, the commercial folks wouldn't be there. That's where our pilots are grown. That's where our underlying aviation industry is there. And I want to thank you for your work, this committee for its work, in any way I can help, I'd be appreciative. And I want to thank those two folks up there. Those are the folks that I trust when I have to go get information or talk about general aviation. Those two are it. So I appreciate you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe in January, can have you spend a little time with us and talk about the education side. You have done a yeoman's just digging into that. I just told Abby Day we actually have 8 minutes extra. Wow, that we're on time, and we're just laughing about it. But just real quickly, two things. There is a big issue in the aviation world that didn't get brought up today, and this is sight distance at airports, and with the FAA using LiDAR, a very accurate way to determine approach and leaving airports. They've got some real issues with obstructions and shortening some airports. I know it's a big one at our meeting, and I'll probably try to put some folks together just to look at that. We're going to have to be very reasonable and thoughtful about touching this if we can, and I'll probably be doing that. Also, Vice Chairman, Josh is going to give you the list of all these people that haven't done their survey, and our committee would like to help them be accurate. Okay. Would you help us do that? I would love to. You would love to? Okay. Because we've got to get this report right. I think that's going to kind of open up some doors and just put some problems to rest that are out there and doing that. But I appreciate y'all. This is such a great committee and so interesting, and I hope we won't get to see y'all. I hope you enjoy your families and friends in this holiday season, and we'll head out of here on Thursday. But I appreciate it. Call on us. I mean, that's how this meeting occurred. All these things that we talked about today are things different ones have asked me about. So I appreciate it, and thank y'all very much, and our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.